I'm Pat Langston, and this is our Lipscomb Legends series. Today we are with Dr. Harold Hazelip, president of Lipscomb University from 1986 through 1997. Welcome, Dr. Hazelip.
Thank you.
Thank you for being with us. You've had a long and varied career, but I'd like for us to begin by asking you to tell us about your early years, your birthplace, childhood, family, things like that.
I grew up in central Kentucky, about 18 miles from Mammoth Cave. That's probably the easiest thing to locate us by. I'm eighth in a family of 9 children. So there's never a whole lot of food around the house, you know. Except my dad had a grocery store and a post office. Small church, 30 people or so. Just totally rural. 7 miles to the county seat. 16 kids in my high school graduation class.
Wow.
That's probably enough for you to get an idea of just fresh off the turnip truck at one point or the other.
Well, what about your family? You said you were one of 9 children? Okay.
I was the youngest of 4 boys in the family. The next was 11 years older than myself, so I grew up in a family of girls. The brothers were gone from the home before my memory really cuts in to daily activities in any detail. So all 3 of the other brothers were preachers. They didn't start that way. That's all I ever intended to do. But in each of their cases, 2 of them were school teachers at the first, and one was a pharmacist. But they all spent much of their lives in preaching.
Was your family close?
Very close.
Your parents made sure of that?
Well, it wasn't too hard. We had, I guess the main thing they did, we knew there was no internal fighting. There was just, sure you have your bumps, your differences maybe, but family was always close. At this point, I have no siblings alive, which tells you the other end of the story. That's you grow up thinking you never will be old because everybody else is old around you, and all of a sudden you realize that you've watched each one of them go. And that's it's in a privilege. In a way, it's a privilege to be able to help someone because with a passage. But anyways, that's not the happiest part of the story.
Sure. Do you have any vivid childhood memories that particularly shaped you as a person?
I suppose everyone does. I do. I've asked people at times, when you're in some study of spirituality, to remember their house, the house where they grew up, maybe even draw a diagram of it, and try to locate the place where you first felt close to God. Someone said something to you, some event happened that made you feel closer to God. I think it's important to identify that person, that place, simply to have a better understanding of how you became what you are. I delayed my baptism until I was 14. That was a delay in our day. 12 was probably the more normal age because nobody knew and nobody knows the precisely best age for everyone, if there were such an age. But anyway, my mother reminded me of that during an evangelistic meeting that we had. That's when such baptisms usually occurred.
Were those tent meetings?
No.
No.
We did have tent meetings later, but at that time we didn't. And my dad was one of the first to talk to me about whether I had an interest in preaching. In a small church like that, they need somebody to preach. They don't need them at 15. But anyway, I pretty young decided that although neither of my brothers was preaching at that time, they were involved in other works before that. But anyway, I give both of my parents credit for having a great deal to do with nudging me in the direction that just living in that home and that church had brought me to.
I recall hearing you tell a story one time, and maybe you'd share it with us now, about a memory you had of, I believe you were going home from church and there was a man lying in the road. Do you recall telling that
Sure.
story? Could you tell us about that?
We would occasionally go to someone's home on Sunday for the afternoon, but sometimes the visits would come after church on Sunday night, and that was such a visit. We were if I lived on a country road, it was at least gravel. This was just a dirt road with a little gravel here and there, out to some farms. And as we left to go home that night, it must have been 9:30. My dad suddenly stopped the car. I don't know how many of us there were in the car, probably 5 or 6. And we didn't know what had happened. There was nothing to stop for, but he had seen a man lying across the road. And he turned the car around and we went back to the house where we'd been visiting and brought someone from there with us because he didn't want to discover what was going on here by himself. Didn't know what the man was, but what the man maybe did, whatever. Turned out the man was intoxicated, and they were able to get him off the road and get him some help. But it was a scary sort of thing for a probably 5 or 6-year-old kid, as I was then.
Did you ever think about that story in terms of any of your spiritual development?
Not other than just the willingness to help and yet to be careful in your help. I learned a great deal from that example.
Okay. Well, I want to talk a little bit about your education. You said you graduated in a school, small school, high school. Where did you go from there?
We had a minister once a year come for usually a 2-week-long evangelistic meeting. That's what was done in those days. Often called revivals, but one of those preachers we thought was more capable than most we'd had. And so I had made my mind that I wanted to go and get some training for what I wanted to do, rather than just going to Western Kentucky College in Bowling Green, as my brothers and sisters had done. And he recommended I go to Freed-Hardeman for a couple of years and then go to Lipscomb for a year. He thought there was a mixture of different approaches at those two places that would be helpful. Thought I had no need for a degree, so just go do the work. So that's the way my plan originated. By the time I got through with my third year, I knew I needed the fourth, and I wasn't out of Lipscomb long until I realized that when you come to bat 3 or 4 times a week, week in and week out, there's a need for a good many resources.
Now, at the time, Freed-Hardeman was a 2-year school,
Right.
correct?
Yep.
So you came to Lipscomb from there.
Right.
Who were some of your classmates at Freed-Hardeman and Lipscomb that we might know? Maybe fellow preachers?
Oh my, the people I've known from Freed-Hardeman best were not even there when I was there. Jim Moffitt of Memphis was, we crossed paths there. Bill Humble had been a little before me. Pat Hardeman had been a little before me. There were others that perhaps you would know. At Lipscomb, Forrest Chapman, who spent his life preaching in Georgia. Paul McGoy, whose father was a preacher before him. Roy Lanier was at Memphis. Roy Lanier Jr., his father was a well-known preacher at the time out in the Midwest. I didn't know him. But both schools had a very liberal sprinkling of preachers. I mean, a sizable percentage of the student body. It's quite different from the situation where we have been for decades now. This is not something just really recent, where the number of young men who plan to preach are just a minority on our campuses.
Who were some of your teachers, maybe the ones especially, that influenced you in profound ways?
At Frieda Hardman, I'd say Claude Hall was one of those. He was a tough teacher of speech and spoken English, but English literature as well. Jim Cope was there at the time, and it was before the later institutional issues had caused a division in the churches of the time. He was the younger of the Bible faculty, which made him a little closer to us than the other guys who are as old as I am now. Not really, but they were close to retirement age. Here, the strongest influence in my life at Lipscomb, I'd say, was Basil Baird Baxter.
I wanted to ask you about him particularly.
I had an English teacher, Mrs. Eel, who taught me to love Shakespeare. I had several people who taught me things that I really do appreciate. But a lot of the things Basil taught me were not in the classroom. Just have developed into a lifelong friendship.
Would you say that he was a mentor for you?
Certainly.
Now, of course, Basil Baird.
I would even have admitted that to him.
Yeah, he was so loved by so many people.
Yes.
When I was in school at Lipscomb, he was the head of the Bible department.
His father was chair when I was here, and then when he died, Basil Baird became chair.
Well, tell me a little bit more about your relationship with him and how that developed. And
actually, when I left here, I saw him occasionally when I would come to Nashville, either passing through to go somewhere else and stop at the Gospel Advocate for a bookstore to look through, or come to Lipscomb for a lectureship or something of that kind. But those were the only contacts that I had with him until a later period when I moved to Memphis, and Herald of Truth came to town with a dinner they wanted to get church leaders to so they could tell them about their plans for the coming year. This would have been the late 1960s, maybe as late as 1970. I'd only been in Memphis 3 years by that time. But anyway, Basil was not there for the meeting, but I spoke. And after the speech, they talked with me about doing some other things with the program. That developed over a period of time. Was not a sudden decision for any of us. But I first began to get resource material together for him. Dan Harless did a lot of that. I'm sure others did. But then I wrote a few scripts for him to use on television.
for Dr. Beck?
Yes. And this was during the time when his cancer was early in discovery, at least, and he began to need help in ways other than that. So I was asked to do, I think, 4 programs, somewhere around 72 on television, but before that I'd been asked to take a summer in radio. He was on radio 30 minutes a week, as well as on television.
He was the voice and the face of Herald of Truth.
He was the voice. 2 other men had begun the program, but it passed from the 2 of them to him. And he was chair of the Bible department at Lipscomb. He was preacher for the Hillsborough Church. He was a very busy person and then a very ill person. I used to tell him years later I wouldn't have had anything to do if you hadn't been sick, which was just about the truth. But anyway, things like Yosemite Family Encampment, which drew several thousand people each summer, he could go to early, but he couldn't go to later, and they wanted a representative of as many programs of interest to the Brotherhood in general as possible. So a lot of work like that developed. But from 71, I'd say, forward, I was involved in radio and from 72 or 3 forward in television. I didn't become regular on television until 77. And the occasion there was they moved the process from Abilene to Dallas because of videotape versus filming.
Mm-hmm.
It cost so much more to film the program than it did to videotape it. But it would have cost somebody $2 or $3 million, as I understood it, to set up the shop for doing the videotaping in Abilene. Now, there was not a market for it.
Mm-hmm.
So they had to go to Dallas to find a television station actually to do that. We used a television station in the early years there.
So you were traveling a
to
good bit from Memphis to Dallas to film those.
We would eventually, when the two of us were both, I was doing 3 things, he was doing 3 things. I was working with Highland Street Church and with the graduate school and with Herald of Truth. Mm-hmm. And he was still doing the 3 things I mentioned a while ago. So he persuaded the elders at Hillsborough, or at Highland rather, to invite Joe Barnett to share the television responsibilities with us, which he did for, I'd say about close 5 years or so, mm-hmm. something like that. So we'd meet in Dallas on Monday afternoon, go to dinner together. Someone from Abilene would pick us up at the airport, go to dinner together. We'd go to the motel and talk briefly about our plans for the following day, make one program the next morning, one program the next afternoon, ditto on Tuesday. Well, that was Tuesday. Mm-hmm. Ditto on Wednesday, and come home for Wednesday night service if possible.
So you would film 5 or 6 episodes each trip, perhaps?
4.
4.
In those days.
Mm-hmm.
The time came when, after Bachelet died, when I actually did at least 13 of them in 1 week. I don't remember if we did more than that or not, mm-hmm. by myself. Mm-hmm. Had a guest on each time for the conversation portion of the mm-hmm. program. But by that time, we learned how to do it in the sense of avoiding retakes mm-hmm. so many times and so on.
Right. You said earlier that you had thought from a very early age you wanted to preach. And I want to talk a little bit about that. Your preaching, some of the places that you've been to preach, the churches that you've worked in. I know you were at Memphis for a long time.
I began from here at Owensboro, Kentucky. That's another long story, but I started filling in for them. And during the school year, my junior year, went 2 Sundays a month. An older gentleman from Nashville was going 2 Sundays a month. And between my junior and senior years, they invited me to come for the summer. He didn't want to make that 125-mile trip one way each weekend. So the following school year, I went every weekend and then moved there when I graduated. Was there about 5 years, was invited to the Taylor Boulevard Church in Louisville, which at that time was a church of 600 or so people, largest church in the state of Kentucky, but I was working with a man 10 years older than me, and we were sharing responsibilities. Both of us wanted to do some evangelistic meetings, mission meetings especially. So that worked for a period of time, and during that time I went to seminary and worked off my BD degree, and then I kept wanting to go back to school because I enjoyed so much more what I was doing when I had an opportunity to teach somewhere than what I was doing when I was driving point to point in the town, trying to visit all the hospitals in the city of 500,000 people. Mm-hmm. It just is such a time consumer. And I felt some way more fulfilled by the one than I did by the other, and I don't know the reasons for that. But anyway, that's what led me to go to the University of Iowa, which was the only state university in the country offering a PhD in religion at the time.
Really?
The Supreme Court had ruled you couldn't practice religion in public schools, but you could teach about religion. And so Iowa picked it up, and later several state schools did and still do offer PhDs in religion. But anyway, from there to Memphis to work with the graduate school, but it wasn't very long that I was working with pulpit responsibilities at Highland Street Church. And from there, when I came to Lipscomb, Lipscomb had a rule, and I thought it was a good rule, that the president could not hold a job with a local church. Several of the teachers did, but that was good for me because there was plenty to do without that.
So you preached at the Highland Street Church for how many years?
Well, beginning to end, from 67 to 82, and that doesn't really end it. After I ended, one person did not stay very long at all. They had just had some difficulty getting into their next person, which turned out to be Philip Slate for a time, and they brought Harold Shake back from where they'd supported him as a missionary in Milwaukee for several years, and he was there for a long stay and did an excellent work.
I'm sure there weren't many guys who wanted to follow you
well,
preaching, but
I don't think that would be very hard. My wife would probably have enjoyed going through that.
Well, while you were at Highland Street, you also were with the Graduate School of Religion, Harding Graduate School of Religion, Dean of the school.
After 5 years, I went there just to teach as an assistant professor. 5 years later, Dr. West retired. Harding had a retirement age of 65. That was mandatory. And he could stay with the school in another capacity. He continued to teach. But I was chosen as dean at that time, so I was in administration for 14 years there. I was there 19 years.
What were your fondest memories of Harding Graduate School?
You know, it would be difficult to pick out single memories, but I have a lot of fond memories overall. We saw an awful lot of young people come through there and go out into meaningful ministry. And I've been able to follow a good many of them in doing wonderful works. We had very few young ladies at the time. We did have some who became very competent and filled teaching positions. One lady at ACU I know for several years, but some other places as well. But it was unusual for a young lady to take a BD in those days. I think more would probably do today. But we just had lots of young people preparing for the mission fields, where both would do a lot of preparation.
I wanted to ask you about your preaching. Did you primarily do expository preaching or topical preaching or some of both?
Some of both.
What did you like doing more?
Hindsight is better than foresight, you know. In hindsight, I would do more expository preaching. I think it's better for the church all around. At that time, I had scarcely heard an expository sermon. The sermons I heard were often built on a Bible story as I grew up as a child. The preachers that we had in our rural community usually did not have the benefit. The preachers who normally visited our small congregation had not had very much training, and it was easiest for them, it seems to me, to start with a Bible story. And that was a good form of teaching. But by the time I was an adult, and especially during my college years, topical preaching was what I heard most of. And I think one tends to be shaped, at least originally, by what one hears. And so I did more topical preaching at the first, but gradually there came to be more expository series.
This might not be a fair question, but if you could only preach one sermon, what would that be?
Well, I don't know that. I really don't know.
Do you have a
the one I've preached more than 200 times was The Impossible Dream. I didn't plan it that way.
The Impossible Dream.
Did you not hear the sermon?
I think I've heard that. It does ring a bell. But I would probably
have
been
escaped
very
it.
young at the time.
You may have escaped it. That's good for me. I've got an old tape somewhere, but you probably don't have a recorder like that anymore. I don't, to play it. But anyway, it was a sermon built on the Sermon on the Mount. But it came at the time of Man of La Mancha. And I used an illustration from the Impossible Dream,
Yes.
the Man of La Mancha. And did it in September, I don't remember the year, I'd say in the late 60s, at Highland, because we were across the street literally from Memphis State University. now Memphis, University of Memphis. And we had a good many, we had several faculty. We had the president of the university there for several years. And we had a good many students, a Bible chair on campus.
Yes.
But anyway, the elders came to me again, I think the first of the year, and said, would you preach that sermon again? There were people that weren't here, and we think that it has kind of a forward look about it that would be good for the church at the beginning of the year. And that led to another and another invitation here and there, so eventually more than 200 times. That would be the easiest thing for me to do. Mm. Probably if I were doing a sermon that would be my favorite sermon. I wish I could tell you it's the Sermon on the Mount. That's what that one is. But that's too much for one sermon. Mm-hmm. It would probably be Philippians 2, 5 through 11, using that text. Yes. Although it was Paul's writing, it's the exaltation of Christ and is a beautiful hymn of the early church, as we can best tell.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your presidency at Lipscomb. You came in 1986, and how did that come about?
Again, there are a lot of stories there. I'll just go a bit of the way. It's hard for me to know when to cut myself off.
It's okay.
I had a sabbatical at Harding. Mm-hmm. I had taught for several years. I'd done what we've talked about, just had been busy. I finally told Dr. Gaines, the president, I think I've been putting out long enough. I've got to take in. I've got to have some time to just think and study, refresh myself. And he said, can you cover the classes? Which meant, can you do it without Harding spending money? And I told him I thought we could. So we had a person or two come over from Cersei to teach a class or two, but most were covered by people we could have in the Memphis area. It took 6 months. I went to England. I thought if I didn't go a pretty good distance away, there'd be too many temptations to go make a speech for Herald of Truth. A good thing to do, a needed thing, or for Harding, or for something else. Mm-hmm. And this would maybe get me into what I wanted to do. So I came back, and Tom Wolfe's book, You Can't Go Home Again. Mm-hmm. It's hard to go home again. It was hard to fit in. I don't know if I've ever admitted that, Pat, in a way that could become public before. But I was as welcome back as could be. Cool. I was treated as well as possible. But something has changed. One or two faculty members had left for other jobs. Other changes had occurred, but it was just, you're just a different person when you come back. Mm-hmm. And not terribly long after that, I had another invitation or two that I had had through the years, either from a church or from a school, that had gotten my attention, but decided each time I didn't want to move our boys. They had moved enough as when they were very young, from Louisville to Cedar Rapids to Memphis. I wanted them to have some roots, and they wanted to have roots. So that has a lot to do with it. And then Lipscomb had a rule in this that they were going to follow. They weren't going to talk to anybody that didn't apply for the job, is the way I understand it or remember it. And I had a rule where I didn't want to apply for something, so I'd like to have this job. So, but the chair of the board was a wise man. He sent a person to me, at least that's what the person told me, and had a talk with me and said he would like to just see your resume. He'd like for you to do that. You're not applying, we're getting technical now.
No, that's okay.
We both know I was showing an interest, and he was showing an interest, and neither of us would have denied that. So after he saw this, he called me, and eventually that's the way the process began.
Okay. Well, that's fascinating to hear that story. I wondered, while you were president for the 11 years, what were the biggest challenges for you as president at Lipscomb University during those years?
Well, your challenges are, one, money to operate. We used to say, you know, it costs us X number of $1,000s per student to take a student through 4 years to a college degree. So you know how much money you're losing. We just have to make it up on volume. That's a joke. But anyway, you've got to make it up some way. There is the task of getting students here. Even if you have the money, you've got to recruit against a lot of attractive programs elsewhere, and people who know how to recruit as well as you do or better. So those were the big challenges, I think, the biggest challenges. We had a third challenge that was a bother, but I think we could have accomplished several things we didn't accomplish if we hadn't had this challenge. We attempted to borrow money through municipal bonds, through issuing bonds, not ourselves, but through an agency. And the vice chancellor at the time told me that he'd sued Vanderbilt several times. He said he's never won, but that doesn't deter him. He was, I'm sure, an honest person who thought that Lipscomb was too religious to have access to tax-free bonds. And of course, I did a little study myself, called the presidents of the various church-related colleges in Tennessee, of which there are several. I talked to them and found that almost every one of them had these bonds. One or two did not. But anyway, we were sued, and that just meant one court to another. We were all trying to stay out of an actual court fight. We were trying to settle in some way, but we got into the Sixth Circuit without going through a local trial, and then applied to the Supreme Court to have them try it themselves, to give us a judgment on it without going through trial. That didn't work. They had too much on their line anyway. We had a person who thought he could help us through that process. But anyway, that's kind of the background of it. But we spent a good bit of money, but also an awful lot of time and concern to just have access to what every other church-related school in Tennessee had access to already, because they had not been sued. And that was kind of a sad part of the journey, because it was like the sword of Damocles hanging over your head when you have a rather high officer in the local bank have you and your CFO down for lunch and say, I hope the board knows that you're creating a certain amount of shadow debt, because if you should lose this lawsuit, we would have to go back and charge you the interest on this money beforehand. It would have been sizable. So that was the other challenge. That was a very unpleasant one. But anyway, I say all that in the middle of telling you that I've pretty honestly, tongue-in-cheek a little bit, told people I've never worked a day in my life. I've always done what I wanted to do. There were a couple of hours I had to work once in a while, and some of that work came during those legal problems.
Well, during your tenure, the school went from David Lipscomb College to Lipscomb University. So that was, I'm sure, a challenge as well, wasn't it? It's
not a great big problem. So many schools were doing it at the time that there are still some fine schools in America. They're called college, and Dartmouth College, or for example, and there's still some, and there's certainly some very small schools with maybe questionable areas called university. But anyway, it is our mark for it was when we were accredited by Southern Association of Colleges and Schools as a third level institution that is offering a master's degree. That's when we felt we could move to university status. We had even some board sentiment that we shouldn't call ourselves a university in the same city with Vanderbilt, for example. Belmont had not made that turn, and the president, who was a friend of mine, was quoted as saying they had a master's degree, but they didn't choose to go in that direction. But they did not long after that. But anyway, it was a time when many people were making that change.
I wanted to ask you about, given the current political climate, social climate, cultural climate, what do you think are the challenges for Lipscomb University going forward?
I'm glad I don't have to figure those out and or deal with them. And it would be hard for me, as far removed as I've been from the day-to-day processes for 20 years now.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to believe that I've been retired 20 years. I think just as a starter, Money Magazine in October, which I'm not a subscriber to, but they sent me a copy, has a list of colleges you can attend in America with free. And it's a sizable list, scattered pretty well across the nation. And that's somewhat typical, I think. People who live in Tennessee know now that a community college can often be had for 2 years of education free. I think there's a movement in that direction. The movement toward university without walls has been here for a while now. It's made some improper moves at times, apparently, at least the government has decided that in terms of government loans to students. But at the same time, anything that offers the education for less money or less sacrifice can be a challenge. I think an institution which keeps a strong religious commitment has its challenges. The culture will probably not become friendlier to that because the country is becoming more diverse, and that's just a common thing. There are a few subjects right now that are more controversial in America than the immigration subject, but there are futurists who say America will be needing, the U.S. will be needing immigrants before many years. Some say it already does. So I think that's going to be a part of the process too. How long can you have a university that has a unique status and takes it seriously, not just survive but thrive, that kind of atmosphere? For instance, you have a number of institutions that want to be research institutions and have national reputations, similar to an Ivy League school. Baylor would be one could mention. And they've gone through so many problems in the process. Google Notre Dame sometime and look at the secularization of Notre Dame. Just Google the articles on that subject, and you'll see how some friends of Notre Dame in the past, at least, and perhaps in the present, I don't read many of the articles, feel that Notre Dame has made considerable sacrifices somewhere in its faculty, its curriculum, or its processes that have moved it away from its central purpose. So there are challenges from the culture at all times, and it will be very hard for any university to have it's hard to have a Harvard reputation no matter what, or a Vanderbilt reputation no matter what. It'd be very hard for a school with a strong Christian commitment, I think, to have exactly that appeal. Now, that doesn't mean there won't be plenty of good schools, excellent schools, that will keep their principles. It just means that those are some challenges.
Yes. Well, no doubt you've traveled a lot in your career. Do you have any favorite places that you've been?
Yes. Now, they have very little to do with what we've been talking about.
That's okay. I just wanted to kind of throw that in there.
Well, for years, Helen and I preferred to go to England more than anywhere else outside the country. We have had opportunity to go I haven't counted the continents or the countries. That has been important to us. But our favorite places are now, really, if I named them 1, 2, 3, it would be Italy first. That's the old hill towns that do it for us more than anything else. France second. It's the south of France and the beauty and interest of Paris. And then England would be third in places outside the country.
Well, it's interesting because I think it was under your presidency that Lipscomb began their study abroad program. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. Was that your initiative or someone else's?
When I came, there had been conversation about having a program in France, but no movement had been made that I'm aware of to actually make it materialize. There was a missionary in this city. It's where they make the Airbus. And he's now at Harding in Searcy, but he had Lipscomb connections. And there was a lot of thought going into, but I don't know of any plans that were around for them to actually make the move into France. So Helen and I we had either had enough mileage for free tickets or paid for our own way, whichever way it was. And went to Europe and visited Pepperdine's program in Heidelberg, in London. Looked at Harding's program, I believe, in London, maybe one other place. They were in Italy, yes, in Florence. Looked at Harding's program in Florence. And then went to this city in southwestern France and looked at it. And we came back, and when I talked to the dean and the other administrators about what we had seen, we decided that city was away from the center of Europe, way down southwestern France. It would be hard to go to some of the museums that are located in Vienna, even in Florence, in several places, Berlin, much harder than if it were located somewhere more centrally. We thought that Strasbourg would be an excellent place. We also thought Vienna was an excellent place. So we came back and recommended Vienna. The dean especially requested, he said, I understand what you're saying, but I want this to be the faculty's idea. I want it to be there as something they can buy into, they can be part of at a very early stage. And
smart.
So I promised him that I would make no move in that direction until he'd had an opportunity to follow that process. So he went back to the faculty, told them we were interested in having an overseas program, gave them some materials to think about, and then, as I recall, sent some representatives to 2 or 3 places that appealed to them most, and they came back and had selected Vienna.
Well, that program has exploded, and I know a large percentage of Lipscomb students participate in that each year.
It's been a wonderful place. It is a wonderful place to do that. At the time, we knew very little about Vienna, a bit more about some other places, but Strasbourg, for example, it looked like, from everything we could learn, it would be quite difficult to find the place even that would be available on reasonable terms to have such a program. We weren't going to be able to just go in and buy a place. So that's the background. I thought the time had come, and certainly would be coming, when a part of your education done in another country would be a real asset for employment.
Absolutely. Well, in all we've talked about your travels. What about fascinating people? Have you had an opportunity to really meet people that were so interesting or fascinating that you just so different than anyone else, perhaps?
Oh my, I could have done that without traveling. Among the most interesting people I'd start with E.H. Imes. When we moved to Memphis to work with the graduate school, Brother Imes was working for Highland Street Church. He would have been approaching 80. He lived to be almost 100. She lived to be above 100. But those years with him, just being around him, having an opportunity to visit with him some, that was a wonderful experience, a wonderful series of experiences. I've already mentioned Batsell Barrett, his impressions on me. I could go back to the schools that I attended and tell you people there that really had an influence on me more than others, but some of them would be at seminary, some of them would be at Iowa. Outside of those, I don't know quite where to start with that list.
Right. I've heard several people during my life mention your ability to recall things, and even spoke of it in terms of a photographic or eidetic memory. So do you want to comment on that?
I think that I would be well advised to keep a little humility in there. Whatever secret there is, keep it, because I don't think there's much of it.
We'll do that.
I just, I've loved reading all my life, and hard work will explain a few things, but the rest of it,
Well, one other question,
God's blessed me in many ways.
We'll wrap this up. How would you like to be remembered?
Well, you know, most important thing to me, honestly, is to be remembered by my boys, my sons, and my wife. And I don't mean necessarily in that order. There's no order there. And then you get to add grandchildren, and now I've got 3 great-grandchildren.
Okay.
But, you know, I came to realize a long time ago that people need you and they want you for a time. But I talked with Brother Imes one day about a very attractive opportunity. It happened to be with the church, but it was just the kind of thing that I would have thought as a younger man I would long for or hope for. And he listened to me, and when I gave him time to think, he said, well, I tell you, I hear they use people up pretty fast out there. Well, that was a homely way of saying something that was important. And that was it. That it may be important to remember who's going to come to your funeral and be nice to them, you know. But in a lot of ways, that's brought home to one, but never more than through children or through husband-wife relationships. Got a couple of little, one little great-grandchild is 5 years old. Cute, good as he could be. But I got 2 more that are just 2. And boy and a girl. But between the 3 of them, they keep life very interesting.
Sure.
They're a lot of fun. Yeah. And I'd just like for them to have some good memories. I don't care about them remembering what I did or where I did it or when, just except what kind of person I was with them.
Well, Dr. Hazelip, it has been a very great pleasure of mine to be with you today.
Well, I've enjoyed the visit with you.
I want to thank you for your service to Lipscomb University, but more importantly for all the work that you've done over your life to advance the kingdom of God.
As I said, I've enjoyed every day of it.
Thank you.